a city that deals with high levels of poverty, historically a city that has dealt with high levels of addiction. And for many years, even though we went through in the early part of the century, heroin and then cocaine, then crack cocaine, and now back to heroin. Heroin has usually been the drug of choice in Baltimore going back decades. And, it is the home of Frederick Douglass. It's the home of Thurgood Marshall and a bunch of people who are well known to America. But it has struggled because of its poverty, because of its addiction, and because of to some degree, the neglect that has been given or the disinvestment to correct the poverty, the housing, the addiction. It then spurs to what we know as crime and violent crime, which is a byproduct of all those other social ills when unaddressed. And so we historically have dealt with that. And then when you think about the killing of Freddie Gray, when he died in 2014, and then the riots of Baltimore, we have hit over 300 murders ever since that year. But we began to see some light at the end of the tunnel, ending last year. The first time we were down in 20, but we were down again last year in 22, but only by one murder. And now we're seeing that momentum carry over into the first quarter of this year. And so we spend a lot of time on violence reduction strategies, comprehensive strategies. And my message from the day I walked in 4 years ago has been, we cannot do this with just policing. We cannot change people's life conditions and their decisions to commit crime, which are a product of their life decisions and their life conditions, with just policing. And so we comprehensively now are working on prevention, intervention, enforcement, rehabilitation, and reentry by working to help young men have a pathway away from crime instead of always just enforcing against them after they commit crime. We're doing both, but for the first time, we really are focused on changing why people commit crime instead of just always chasing them after they do it. So that's a little bit about Baltimore. It has had ups and downs in its political environment. It's a very, very tough political environment to work in. We have had a number of police commissioners. I'm the first commissioner to last 4 years in probably a 10-year period. And before me, there had been 5, none of whom made it over a year and a half to 2 years. And so stability in leadership. The mayor who hired me had to step down and resign from being the mayor only 2 months after I was hired and moved to Baltimore. So there was instability in the mayor's office. There was instability in the police commissioner's office. Now we have a mayor with stability. Now we have a police commissioner with stability. And we're seeing the city turn around now because of that stability and fidelity to the strategies. So we're not changing leaders every year, which means we're not changing strategies every year. Right. And I think that's why we're seeing momentum now for the first time in a very long time. But thank you for that.
Yeah, it's important to have that consistency in leadership and strategy. Absolutely. Commissioner Outlaw.
Hi there again. I've had the benefit of working in 3 different states. And I think this is a really important question because depending on where you are, policing may differ. We all know that our police departments are a subculture of the larger culture within that city or the state or the region. And I've learned to adapt depending, on the state that I'm in, because community expectations vary. So I really appreciate this question. But Philadelphia has about 1.6 million people, around 141 square miles. I'm going to look down at this for some stats. A little over 43, close to 44% African-American, close to 34% white, 15% Latino, Latina, 8% AAPI. And when I started our authorized strength, we're the 4th largest police department in the country. When I started, our authorized strength for sworn was 6,500, and that was down from previous years. Then it was reduced to 6,380. And the total number of officers that we actually have today is 5,786. And I think that speaks to the attrition issues that we're all seeing, but also some of the recruitment challenges that we're seeing, given that we're not just competing with other agencies, we're competing with the private sector now, who's offering employment with the ability to work from home or have a hybrid situation or have good days off and everybody loves you and all these things. So the changing political landscape or the changing narratives or the changing social technological landscapes, I think, have really impacted the demographics or these stats that we share with you today compared to what it would have been in 2020 or 2019, pre-COVID, pre-unrest, pre all these things. The one difference, so this is my first time working in a city and a county. So Philadelphia, like San Francisco, like LA, it's city and county. So the administration is all one. In Oakland, in Portland, we were always told as officers, you stay away from anything that has to do with elections, right? The sheriff's got that. Not here. Not only is Pennsylvania a swing state, but it's really driven by Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. So when elections took place, we're planning, I'm ramping up for any unrest, and there was unrest around election stuff. That kind of tripped me out when I first had to deal with it, because I was like, no, we don't touch that. We don't touch that. But we do. We provide security for the ballot boxes, all these things. And this is one of the largest cities remaining where it's still a city of neighborhoods, but it's still largely segregated. And you can very quickly tell when you drive through neighborhoods who lives where. So all the isms that we talk about, they're overt here. And initially I was like, I thought this was the North. But the good news is, who you're dealing with. And but people, it's so intertwined, right? The other significant thing is this. Someone asked the question, and I want to take a moment. They, were asking, do we, bring it to God, for self-care and wellness? Absolutely. Absolutely. These are personal things that we're talking about. We all family now. So, I feel comfortable in sharing this. I had to get on myself the other morning and I said, how you go to bed praying and you wake up worrying? It doesn't work like that. It's not supposed to work like that. But I'm constantly in prayer, and I wake up every morning in gratitude. And I try to tell my sons that as well. Always find something to be grateful for. And you'll be surprised how much, that does for your well-being, just spiritually and mentally. Because again, if you're not, whatever it is, whatever that means to you, psychologically and mentally, it's going to mess you up in these jobs, because we see the worst of the worst of the worst. But I'm sharing that because this is a very religious city, very religious. High percentage of our population here have some form of religious affiliation. So it's okay. These are things that I got to think about. It's sad, but these are things I got to think about. I don't have a problem when I tweet something out, or if I'm speaking or giving remarks, I can mention religion. In Portland, you better not mention anything about religion at all. And that's something that I had to learn. I come from a religious upbringing. And in Oakland, it wasn't as much, but here it's okay. I mean, I had people when I first got here say, we want to pray over you. Thank you. We want to come bless your office. Come on. A group of female pastors once a month got together virtually, prayed over me. And it's so fulfilling, but it's okay to do that, because regionally, that's something that you have to understand. So when it comes to interacting with your employees, you have to understand that there's something else that drives and guides them. And it's okay to tap into the spiritual side. So I just think as a leader, you have to pay attention to the culture of where you are. And again, it's very political, it's very religious, and sometimes there's overlap. And again, it's a high minority population here. And like Mike said here, poverty is an issue. There's still conversations that need to be had around housing inequities, food inequities, all the insecurities that I believe further exacerbate and are driving the crimes that we see. And to be a city that's so large, still dealing with issues like this is a challenge. So you definitely have to know where you are. And then the last thing I'll say is this: the national average for women in police departments continues to hover around 14%. I remember a few years ago, it was about 12, right? But the good news with us is that we're a lot higher in that. And, I think we're hovering around 21% female. That's still not okay. But the good news is that we have more employees that represent the population. As far as gender, but we still have a lot more work to do as it relates to that. So I think the key takeaway for me is that depending on where you are, you have to be mindful of the cultures, the subcultures because that's going to drive community expectations and how communities expect to be policed.
And thank you for that. And that lets our audience know you have to know your community. If you're going to police your community, you have to know and understand the composition of your community, because like you said, it's religious, it's cultural, it's any number of things. So thank you for bringing that up. You know, some of our audience are probably some up and coming leaders, and they really did need to hear that. Chief Murphy Paul.
Yeah, thank you. So our city has around 225,000 residents. We sit on around 88 square miles. Our police department has around 888 positions. 698 of those positions are sworn police officers. And we average, which is interesting, we average about 50 vacancies a year, right? For the past decade, that's what we've averaged. And right now we're sitting on around 100 vacancies. In a department. Demographics, population, whites represent probably around 35.6% of the population. African Americans represent about 53 to 54% of the populations. Hispanics around 4.1, which is our largest other minority. One of the things, like we are a very resilient community. Baton Rouge is. You know, in 2016. We had several incidents that created a lot of trauma in our community. We had the Alton Sterling death, which led to some civil unrest in the city, some protests, a lot of national attention. And right after, shortly after that, we had our heroes who were killed. Our police officers were murdered, several police officers, as well as deputies with the sheriff's office as well. So when you have all of this trauma that took place in a very short period of time, and in the midst of that, we had what's called the Great Flood of 2016, where so many of our residents lost their houses. So you have all of this trauma in a short period of time. It was really challenging. I think we were fortunate to have some stability in the leadership, and that was under the direction of our mayor, Mayor President Sharon Weston Drum. And I can tell you that I'm excited, and she's a praying mayor. She's a woman of God, but she really has an understanding, kind of like a holistic approach on what the city needs to take us to that next level. When we talk about crime, she understands the prevention, the intervention, as well as the enforcement piece. But her leadership and her Safe, Hopeful, and Healthy Baton Rouge initiative is really, really getting to the point where we're starting to see the services that are being offered are really starting to change things in the community. So very resilient community here in the city of Baton Rouge. Some great things, going on. One in particular is the perception of the police department. You know, we've seen some great strides in that. Use of force down, use of force incidents down 46%, internal affairs reports down over 52% since our mayor has been in office and has been leading our effort and engaging the community in all things policing. So great community. I love working, serving for the men and women. If you join us on our Facebook, because I'm trying to get these numbers up, right? Go to our Facebook, follow us. You can follow Philly too, and you can also follow Baltimore. But please follow us on social media. We're trying to do a better job of putting a lot of information out. But I just put a letter in a newspaper, in a Sunday paper, talking about the great work that the men and women are doing here in the police department and why we serve. And I wanted to make sure that we did that on the same day of Martin Luther King's birthday. And so please, if you get an opportunity, go read that, and it'll just kind of tell you why I love this job, why I love the men and women who work for this police department, and where they shared how they serve.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to move on to our next question. You know, naturally, it's a lot of changes through the years with law enforcement. All of you have been in law enforcement for a while. But one of the changes, certainly from my days in law enforcement, has been social media, and this little beauty right here, if you can see it, this cell phone. We didn't have that, and I don't think probably any of you in your careers came on where there was the social media and the explosion of cell phones. So let's talk candidly about, the impact of social media, the impact of cell phones and information age 24/7, 7 days a week. Talk about how this impacts law enforcement positively and negatively, and what your views are on some of that. And I know you all can talk about how you started out. We didn't have this, and where we are now with everybody with a cell phone recording everything all the time. Commissioner Harrison, let's hear from you.
Well, it is definitely a change in dynamic. The 32 years I've been on the department, we went from number one, only maybe a 10 to 12 hour news cycle to the 24-hour news cycle. And then the advent of cell phones, when we didn't have them when I started, and now everyone has one. It has not only changed the way police officers have to serve and protect, because everything that we're doing is being recorded, either from a cell phone with somebody holding it, from a camera system, either implemented by the city or some level of technology, surveillance technology that's out there, either that we have purchased or built or someone else did, or we are recording ourselves now through cameras that we wear on our own uniforms. And so there are pros and cons, they're both good and bad, because it captures every single thing we do. It captures the things that we do wrong, but it also captures the things that we are accused of doing wrong that are actually within policy, but might look bad. There is a thing called awful but lawful. And there are times that when we do our jobs, it is not pretty. It is not the thing that really looks pretty. And there are times some people are going to have the negative experience, especially if you're on the end of the encounter where you're given a citation or you are being arrested or a family member. And so that's never a good feeling for people. And sometimes there are issues that get captured on camera where there's use of force. Maybe it's authorized, and then sometimes it's not, but it's captured on camera. So we have to teach officers now that everything they're doing is being recorded. I think it's a little easier, and I'll be interested to see what my colleagues say. It's a little easier now for our younger generation as we train them, who are born into the profession of just 24-hour technology. They are accustomed to it. It is maybe some of our more seasoned people who have taken a longer time to transition into the acceptance that everything we do is recorded, and to embrace that and welcome that and then perform to that. But that's all part one. Part two, as leaders, it causes us to manage in a very different way, because we can no longer manage with the anticipation of the next news cycle being the next day. The next news cycle is right now. Mm-hmm. And so we have to manage our organizations and be the leaders to have constant inflow of information, accurate, timely information about everything that's happening in the field, everything that's happening in the profession. And by the way, we're managing our agencies, for me in Baltimore, not just on what happens on the streets of Baltimore. I am managing my agency based on what's happened on the streets of any city in the USA, because anything that happens anywhere affects us everywhere. And now that we see that there's an incident in one city, all of us are now preparing to manage and do something different, and to have our departments do a particular thing in a certain way because something happened somewhere else. But we have to be prepared to lead in real time and have information, timely and accurate information in real time, because those decisions and our communication about how we lead and manage has to be in real time, and it has to be timely and accurate because of the cell phone, because of the body camera, because of the surveillance systems that are owned by government or on private property, and because everything we do is under close scrutiny and being recorded. We have to be prepared for anything at any time, all the time.
It does keep you your situational awareness all the time in real time, as you say. How's it changed your policy? What did you have to do with, policy changes and giving officers, guidance, in terms of social media and the use of?
Well, we had to look around the country at different social media policies to figure out who has the best one. We have to be tough, but we have to be flexible. What we want is not to limit what officers do on their social media, but we want to make sure that they are not doing anything that, number one, would compromise criminal cases, and number two, would disparage our agency or themselves or the profession generally. And we want to make sure that they're not doing that. And if they are, then obviously we now have an investigatory process with a disciplinary process that addresses it. But yeah, we have to give clear guidance on what you can and cannot do while working, while in uniform, while on government time, and while representing the agency. And then what you do on your off time regarding social media, we want to make sure that you're not doing anything, even as a private citizen, that can be linked back to you as a member of our agency that disparages you, the agency, or the profession either. And so those are things we have to be conscious of. And then sometimes we have to make a judgment call on what's really personal and what's a person's freedom of speech, and make sure that we're protecting that, because we never want to go against that. And some stuff will fall under protected speech. We just want to make sure that they're not disparaging the agency, the profession, or themselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Outlaw, your thoughts on social media, how it's affected, your agency negatively, positively, and what policies did you have to put in place?
I'll answer it from a different approach, because I agree with everything that Commissioner Harrison shared. On the positive side, it gives us an opportunity to engage with community, show the human being behind the badge, allow us to be a little bit more personal, give out information in a timely manner. So I absolutely agree with all of that. One of the challenges with that, though, is there's this expectation now that we become content creators. And that's challenging for people who do that for a living, but that's really not who we are and what we do, right? So there's this expectation that we're constantly feeding the information beast, and we might not always have something to share, whether it's, at risk of jeopardizing an investigation, or we just might not have anything to say. And because we've constantly pushed out information, if we're quiet, it seems as though we're not doing our jobs, right? So there's that. But the one thing I will say this, and I know we're going to get more into this in a little bit, so I'll be brief. What we're dealing with is a culture of violence, to be frank. It's a culture of violence. And when the pandemic in 2020 pushed a lot of people indoors, for those that chose to be indoors, it created a form of isolation. We can't ignore the psychological impact that the pandemic had on all of us. We just can't. But the reason why I share this is because I remember, I shared this with somebody the other day. I remember going to school, first day of school, what we do, we put our clothes out the night before, we want to get our best fit for the week. We all went to school on the first day in like our best outfit. And being in person was how we created our social relationships, our personas, or whoever, right? School shut down. We lost our warm touch points. We didn't have the normal abilities to engage and interact. These are things that we require as human beings. So what happened? It pushed all that stuff that would usually happen in person, specifically amongst our young people, online and in social media. And there's even more of a reliance of what we're seeing on YouTube. There's even more of a reliance of what we're seeing in video games. There's even more of a reliance of what we're hearing in music. And my persona is now what I create on social media, whether it's real, perceived, or whatever it is. And we saw our numbers go up, specifically here in Philadelphia. We saw our shootings go up because of social media beefs. You disrespected me online. You said this in this song. You wore this and blah, 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 blah. And now I believe that I have to go and shoot you on sight whenever I see you out and about. And because we lost those warm touch points in the schools, we didn't have the abilities at the time to say, okay, we know young Johnny is out here doing this, that, and the other. Where do they live? Who are their caregivers? So on and so forth. Let's make sure we, have contact or do services or whatever. So it really forced us to adapt with how we connected with our young people, whether it's messaging, how we investigate crimes or whatever. It forced us to adapt the type of training that we offer to our detectives. Our crime analysts also were provided training in social media, so we knew what we were looking for. Now, look, we don't have the resources to be the social media police, but we also know now, and I'm hoping this is obvious to anybody that's out there, social media is an important tool when we're investigating crimes. Because you got a lot of these folks that are out here just doing it blatantly, right out there for everybody to see. Right. So again, unfortunately, we were kind of behind the 8 ball with the use of technology in that sense, when crime, or those who are committing crime, adapted through use of digital tools or social media. And now we're catching up and making sure that we're doing the same. So there's a lot of pros and cons, but the main issue that I have around social media is that a lot of the confrontations and these beefs, or whatever it is that we want to call it, is driven by social media. And when you talk to a lot of these young people in person, you'll see that's not even who they are. I just want to portray this. And there's this desire to keep up with what they see portrayed on social media. I'm not posting a picture of me that I don't think is my best one. Everybody's putting their best foot forward on social media, but try explaining that to a 12-year-old that's not fully psychologically, and mentally developed in that sense. So there's some challenges there, but if we have the resources to put into social media, it's really a really good opportunity to try to get ahead of things before they occur. And then also the last thing I'll say on this too, and when we experienced some very serious civil unrest here in the city in 2020, one of the challenges again was that we were behind the 8 ball. Back in the day, if somebody posted something or said something that they were going to cause harm, we had some time to go knock on their door and say, hey, you said this, did you really mean it? Now we have the ability to live stream. We don't have the time to discern whether what they're saying is aspirational or intentional. And so by the time we get there to respond, it's already happened. So in real time, somebody's saying, meet me out here, we're going to burn this down or do whatever. And it's already occurred because it's happening in real time. And if we're not there in that area, we're reactionary. And we in law enforcement get a lot of criticism for that. So again, there's a lot of pros and cons, but I think we have to be very intentional with how we use social media for good, obviously, but pay attention to how it's being used for the negative as well. And we have to stay on top of that and do our best to stay ahead of it so we don't continue playing catch up the way we have been in previous years.
Thank you. You brought up some great points. I know we have some parents that are part of the audience, and parents have to take an active role in trying to monitor, and I know it's hard, the social media of your children, and not only crime, but also suicides as a result of social media. So, Commissioner, you brought out some great points, and that's a whole nother conversation, but thank you for that. Chief Paul, eagerly waiting to jump in and say something.
Well, I'll tell you, Commissioner Outlaw and Harrison both covered everything. And I don't want to repeat all of the great points that they made because I agree with each one of them. I'm just going to touch on 2 and keep it real because they did such a good job of articulating what we're facing as law enforcement. But one is the irresponsible journalism that I'm noticing more and more. And it appears that our mainstream media is trying to keep up with social media, the bloggers, and the flow of information. So we're starting to see some irresponsible journalism with our mainstream. The false news that's going out there and the toxicity, right? The toxic news travels further, faster, it is shared more, where the positive stories, the great work that's going on in law enforcement, the great work that goes on in the community are not being shared at the same pace or in the same numbers. And I really think that's challenging for us because when news gets out there, unfortunately, some news that's on social media that's trending, whether it's fake or not, we still have to dedicate resources to that. So I can tell you, I'm seeing resources that are being dedicated because of a potential threat or information that's on social media that requires us to go out and investigate and look at it to determine if it's false news or not. And I'm seeing that more and more. So yes, we are dedicating resources to investigative efforts based on things that are happening on social media. And I just wanted to add that piece to it.
Thank you. Very, very good from everybody. Well, I'm going to kind of stay in that same vein and talking about the community. I'm in Detroit. I don't know if I told everyone that our audience. I live in Detroit. I retired from the Detroit Police Department. And we want to build trust and gain trust of the community. And one of the things I noticed, here in Detroit and some others, pushback from the community on some of the technology, gun detection technology. We had some pushback here in the community, about that. So let's have a candid discussion about the community and some of the crime fighting technologies. And how do we gain the trust of the community? I know you hear it, you're trying to, watch us, you're trying to do this, you're trying to do that. But at the same time, you're trying to manage, the crime. So let's talk a little bit about how do we gain the trust of the community and still you're able to do your job and still use technology, for detecting crime. Facial recognition, that's another big one out there that the community. So let's have a candid conversation about that. And since you're shaking your head, Chief Paul, I'm just going to start with you.
Yeah, I'll start this. I just had a community listening session. We've been doing these small, intimate settings throughout the city, talking about crime, and this issue comes up. And one of the takeaways that I got is the education and awareness is so important before you implement strategies, before you implement technology. And part of that is talk about, having conversation about the progress in the department. The camera issue, right? We've had community members say they didn't want cameras. Well, cameras are becoming our new witnesses. You know why? Because as we continue to build community police relations and convince people to come forward and work with us, unfortunately, it is not at the pace where we don't need cameras. And cameras are becoming our new witnesses. Automatic license plate readers are helping us in our investigative efforts. But when I talk to community members and just have this candid conversation about where we're at, because what are the options if I take the cameras away, if I take the automatic license plate readers away? And we're still continuing to work with the community for witnesses to come forward. That same small group of individuals, that's 6% of people who are terrorizing our communities, they continue to do their criminal work. So we have to embrace the technology. I understand the challenges with ShotSpotter. Unfortunately, I can tell you examples where we've had shot fired incidents in our community and no one dialed 911. And it was the ShotSpotter technology that allowed us to get there faster, that allowed us to pick up those casings and time into other crimes. So it's just really the education and awareness. I've been very successful through my chief advisory council that I meet with quarterly and forming some type of a commission to engage in these type of conversations with the public. And here's sometimes the public come up with some of your best solutions to problems. The facial recognition came up and they were very, very strong in it. So right now in our chief advisory board, we have our residents working with our officers to create a facial recognition policy that works for everybody. Right? There's going to be a lot of audits in place. It can only be used in specific type situations, but we are now working with our chief advisory council on our facial recognition policy. So that's important. But also another thing is getting these elected officials and community ambassadors on board. We got to stop politicizing crime. Okay? We have to stop doing that. And when you get everybody on board, when you're talking about technology, I don't care if they're Republican, Democrat, independent, when we get everybody on board with these coalitions like we're doing here, it really takes the steam out of the few people who have a voice, who are going against something that's going to make their community safer.
Thank you. Thank you. So engage in the community more. I heard you mention listening sessions, ambassadors, all of those things, engage in the community, I think goes a long way, as you said, in and having them understand some things up front. Commissioner Harrison.
Well, I agree with Chief Paul 100%. The only way to ever get anything really significant done with the implementation of technology is to do it with community input and community buy-in. And it takes the education, communication, education, and socialization. You have to socialize it through all four corners of your city. And here's what I learned, because every city has a culture. And the culture of, for example, the culture of Baltimore is you'll get members of the community say, well, you didn't come to the community. And I have advisory council members and people who represent members of the community that I meet with on a regular basis. But there will be community members say, well, you met with leadership. You didn't meet with the community. The community is us and me. And then there are some people say, well, wait a minute. They're not the community, I'm the community. Well, you left me out. And so you really have to do a good job covering all four corners and the city of your city, meeting with all the demographics, the people that support you, the people who don't support you, to hear everybody. And then, like Chief Paul said, to come up with some way to have a co-creation of policy that works for everybody, co-creation of training. So the community has a voice in the policy. The community has a voice in the delivery of the training, and especially things that are controversial, like facial recognition, or aerial surveillance, or any of these other types of things. I mean, we use the same thing you just heard Chief Paul use. We use all of that, and it works. It works in court. It passes the legal standard, and we do very well with it. But there are many people who are very leery and very skeptical of the integrity of its use. And will it be used the wrong way? Will it be used to create disparities against minorities? Because in the past that has happened. And people have very very long memories. They will remember that and are very skeptical. So we have to do a much better job of not just convincing them that it's a good tool, but convincing them that it's a safe tool. And we will use it with integrity and with ethics and have systems of accountability in place as to not abuse.
Good. Yeah, the A word, accountability. It's a good segue into Commissioner Outlaw, because you talked about knowing the culture of your community. It's not a one size fits all, and how you gain the trust, in each one of these communities in talking about this issue and gaining trust and buy-in.
Yeah, I won't repeat everything that was been said. They hit the nail on the head. The technology cannot precede policy or whatever the vetting process is without community investment. Technology is extremely expensive. And unfortunately, with government processes, by the time we go through the budget process to finally get the technology, sometimes it's outdated. So we have to do a lot on the front end to manage expectations and say, okay, do we really need to spend this money for this? What's our intended outcomes? And who did we bring in along the way to make sure that this is really what we're trying to get to? But the reality is this, and if you don't hear me on anything else, hear me on this. The reality is this: as we continue to see our numbers dwindle, we're going to have to rely more on technology as force multipliers. And I don't mean that in the literal sense, but I mean that to supplement where we no longer have the bodies that we once had doing the jobs that we do. And I think, quite frankly, in some areas that's more efficient. So we can have more officers on the ground doing what they should be doing, interacting with people. But we have to use technology more as it relates to forensics and solving a lot of the crimes. For us, we are using DNA in a different way. All of this has a technology implication here to solve crimes and make sure that we can do better link analyses. Cameras are really, really important for us. And, as Chief Paul mentioned, it's important because we still have these trust issues that we're talking about in the community. Witnesses don't want to come forward. There's fear in the community for coming forward and testifying. And so therefore we rely a lot upon video evidence and along with corroborating evidence. So technology really helps us to do our job far more efficiently It's a strong force multiplier, but there has to be policy and community investment before the technology is rolled out. And there has to be a very clear understanding of the price tag that comes along with that as well.
Thank you. Well, we're doing good on time. I've got a couple more questions that I'm going to get to. And we kind of touched upon this when we talked about, recruiting, but, as president of NOVA, I have an opportunity to talk to, federal, state, county, and everybody is struggling with the same thing in terms of hiring, recruiting, especially a diverse workforce, getting females in the door, and the challenges that are there. Just as a sidebar, I ran recruiting for the Detroit Police Department. And I mean, this is the latter part of the 90s into 2000. And what we struggled with in a city that was over 80% African-American was finding people to walk through the door, finding African-Americans, finding females. And I was struggling, even then. And I think Commissioner Outlaw said it before in terms of legacy, as African-American, we don't have that legacy of policing where, white officers, just flowing through the door. So, I know it's a struggle. It's been a struggle for a very, very long time. So let's just, talk on that. I already know everybody's looking for, but, what can we do? How can we help? How can the community tell the community, what can you do, to help? I know we had ambassadors out there and we did all the HBCUs. I told them to go to barbershops, beauty salons, a lot of different things, have been covered, but, talk to our audience about some of those efforts, some of those challenges. And I know you all friends, but, talk about why it's good to come to your, police department. And somebody might be interested, they might be interested in coming to one of your departments. What can they do? If they're in the audience, like I said, we're on Facebook Live, what can they do if they want to join your department? So Commissioner Outlaw, you're smiling.
Yes, I'm shaking my head because I'm looking, I'm like, they better not come to my state trying to poach. And
I didn't want to get anything
That's
started.
why I'm shaking my head.
I didn't want to get anything started, but go ahead.
I think it's important, and this is always a work in progress for us because it costs money. Marketing is key. I know for a lot of us, or at least when I came on, it was the videos of people jumping out of helicopters, rappelling down the sides of buildings. There was clearly a certain image that they were targeting. And there was a strong recruitment for people fresh out of the military. I do not, I honor our veterans and I appreciate their service. I'm a military mom, so it's no disrespect to anyone who served in the military. But that would be like law enforcement's only targeted audience. And now we realize that we're targeting millennials. We're targeting individuals that want work-life balance. We're targeting people that want paid certifications or the ability to work over here for a little bit and then maybe have a different job over here. The expectations of employers have changed, but our profession hasn't changed. We don't offer sabbaticals or anything like that. And then we're competing, again, like I said earlier, not with just those around us in the region or in the state or in the country in law enforcement, but one of our biggest competitors are the private sector companies that offer the ability to work remotely or in a hybrid setting for way more money with good days off. You can be home on holidays and birthdays and weekends and all those great things. So what are we doing in law enforcement to reinvent ourselves to say, look, the crux of what we really do is using our interpersonal skills, relying upon our lived experience, ensuring that we're garnering trust from people that see us and them. How are we reflecting the image that we want to, as opposed to what people see us as? And that's really, really challenging. And that starts with all of your marketing, your campaigning, putting people in positions of influence, whether formal or informal, that reflect the community. I came on as a single mom. I had no business taking the physical agility test with my son being 2 weeks. I was still in stitches, but I wanted this job. Right? So other people who may have been in my situation maybe need to hear my story and say, you know what, I can do this too. If I have a support circle around me, I too can do this. Oh, you know what, I don't have any law enforcement experience, or I was a teacher for 20 years. Can I still do? Absolutely, you can. Let me connect you with someone who did it. And, maybe they can help you avoid the pitfalls. So I think, again, we have to be open to understanding that people are coming in with different expectations and market in that way. And if you can, at the leadership level, policy-wise, make sure that there's policies in place that support the diversity that you're trying to bring in. You don't get to say, I want you and you and you and you, and I want you here because you're amazing. And then when you get here, forget everything I told you. You can only look one way. You can only speak one way. You have to think one way. That you lose people like that. So we have no control over the politics out there. We have no control over the national narrative or anything like that. But what we can do is remove all the institutional barriers that we can that keeps people from saying, nah, I'm good. Police officers, I think, are some of our best recruiters. And at least for me, when I knew, people in my community weren't looking down their nose at me for doing something that we typically don't do in our community, I was like, okay, I got it. So I tell our community members, and for those of you who are on the call, when you see a young person or somebody in your neighborhood, encourage them when they say, you know what, I'm gonna go take the test. Don't say, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to go work for them? Encourage them and support them, and then say, you know what, be their transformational leader, and show that you can be dedicated to and committed to social justice in a different way. So those are some of the things that I would put out there, aside from some of the normal things that we would say when we talk about recruiting.
And I thank you for that. I was a single, divorced, and ended up a single mother, raising a child as well, and working shifts, and, trying to juggle all that. So I certainly understand that. So we have to be cognizant of that paradigm shift. And you mentioned that what we saw before was the hyper masculinity of police department. We have to get away from that image. I was at a summit, and I think in California, they're doing more with that, work-life balance, not only for women, but for men too, that find themselves in caregiving and caretaking and raising children. So, right, we have to have that shift in the model and look at things a little bit differently. We can't recruit and do it the same way as we did even 10 years ago, in fact. Commissioner Harrison, let's hear from you on this subject.
Yeah, look, Commissioner Outlaw touched on a lot of what I would say. And I certainly agree with it. But we're now dealing with generational differences, and we're dealing with, I have people on still on my organization, people who are still with the New Orleans Police Department, where I spent 28 years, people who have 30 and 40 and 40 plus years on, and then we're hiring people who are right at the age of 21. And so we have to lead in different ways, because the leadership style, for one, can't always work for the leadership style of another. The organizational culture and structure that one might be accustomed to might not work for another. And the younger generation that are coming into policing profession now really value their time off more than they value the prestige of rising up in the agency. They value their time off more than they value sometimes an unlimited amount of overtime that they could work. And so we have to work to deal with the needs and the desires of what people coming into the organization now want, versus how we lead the organizations to provide an adequate level of public safety. Obviously, we can't have everybody off and working from home and working remotely, because we need people to patrol and be visible and to do all the things that people call upon police to do, and all the things we want and know we should be doing. But we have to now shift as leaders our thinking to, like we're doing in Baltimore. We're taking on a project now to figure out, we know we want to do it, we have to figure out how to create childcare for those who are single parents. How to create childcare, whether we do it ourselves or contract it out, which is the likely solution. But how do we do that for people who work evening shift? Because we can't let every brand new employee come in and work days and have weekends off. That's what they want, but that can't happen. We're a paramilitary organization. We will always need people to work overnight, but there are many people who work overnight who have childcare issues, who care for elderly parents, who might have their own healthcare issues. And how do we balance that workload and private life balance? And so those are things that are important to us that we have to now pay attention to. And in generational differences, there's a generation now that do not care about the 25-year pension, the 30-year pension. We know that there is a high percentage of people now coming into the organization, especially if they're under 30, they're likely to change not just jobs, but entire professions. After 5 to 7 years, there are many who will just change and move into a totally different discipline. And we have seen that now over the past 10 years, and we have to manage according to that generational difference expectation. How do we do that? How do we recruit? Yeah, we have great incentives, great pay incentives. We want to have more incentives than Philadelphia. We want to have more incentives than Baton Rouge. I want to have more incentives than my next door neighbor. But everybody's pretty much kind of doing the same thing because we're competing for the same small pool of applicants. And hear this, Madam President, of all the applicants that join either Baton Rouge, Philadelphia, or Baltimore, I would say that only about somewhere between 2 and 4 or 2 and 5% of all applicants actually make it to hire. Yeah. About 95 to 97% of people wash out because of some legitimate disqualifying reason. So we're all competing for a small pool of qualified, best of the best applicants. And it is competitive. And all the incentives that we can put into it, what we really want to do, and you asked the question, I want to answer this and I want to shut up. What members of the community can do is help us reframe the value of the profession. And yes, there will always be critical incidents that happen that give us a black eye, but we want to minimize those and reduce those as much as possible. But we have to bring back the nobility of the profession, that we are putting our lives on the line for people we don't know, because we do it because it's a calling. It's a noble calling. And we need the community to embrace that and help frame that conversation so that when people think of police officers, they think of the brave person, the honest person, the person who's sacrificing their lives and their private time to serve and protect us. And we have to bring back that nobility, but that can only happen when the community helps us to do that. And that's what I would admonish people to do. When we do that, people will run to this profession.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. Chief Paul.
No, I think they both hit on it. You know, when we look at what's going on in America, because you hear people say nobody wants to be a police officer anymore. That's just not true. We're still filling academies. We may not have as many applicants. Our academy classes may not be as large, but we still have people in our communities who want to serve. Okay. When we as leaders speak to our own profession in a negative, that does have a negative impact on recruiting. So what I say is there's still people who want to serve in our communities. We just have to be more creative and find them and encourage them to consider this rewarding career. And one of the things Mike talked about, we've done that. We do a great job of responding to 911 calls when people need help. We don't always do a good job of asking the community for help. And that's exactly what I do. Every single interaction with the community is a recruiting opportunity, right? Commissioner Outlaw said the best recruiters that we have is the men and women who wear this uniform. And so we go out and we ask the community, okay, you want to be that change agent? Bring somebody. I challenge our chief advisory council. Every chief advisory council meeting, somebody brings me some young kid, some young person, I'm saying kid, some young adult in the community who wants to serve. And some of those have become police officers. So the community is stepping up and helping. But then we looked at programs that we have, right? We started our Explorer program again. We have young folks who go to our Explorer program who are now becoming police officers. We started a cadet program. We realized in some of the backgrounds between the ages of 18 and 21, some of our young folks make mistakes, and those mistakes, what Commissioner Harrison talked about, are disqualifiers, where they cannot be a police officer because of that mistake. So we hire them at 18 and we keep them in the department. We let them work. They can go to college. And then when they're 21, they can get in that next academy. So that's our cadet program. Then we started the Citizens Academy. so much misinformation out there where we're trying to keep up with social media about negative things about policing in America, policing in our city. So those citizens who go through our Citizens Academy become our ambassadors. And they go out there and they're the ones on social media telling the truth. No, that's not what happened. That's not what the Baton Rouge Police Department is about. So actually educating the community about policing. They do ride-alongs. They go to our shooting range. They go through the TASER program. So every phase that we go through, we have modified versions. And then we started with our youth, with our Police Athletic League, right? We got back with the PAL League, where we're engaging the community in that. And then Noble. Noble's law in your community. Thank you, Noble. You're law in your community, teaching our young folks on how to interact with law enforcement when they have police encounters. We even took that, and now we're partnering with our driving school, because every young kid needs a license. So let's partner with them to teach our young kids how to interact with law enforcement, because it's unfortunate that some of their behavior is guided by what they saw or learned on social media. So being very intentional and using all of those platforms as opportunities to recruit. Now, we had a consent decree, 39-year federal consent decree that was over the city of Baton Rouge. In 2018, we sit down, we made some changes in our recruiting efforts, and we have seen some progress. Our last academy had 80% minority representation. Our 2021 two academies, we had 75% minority representation. 2020, we had 59%. In 2019, we had 64%. So we've seen an 11-point turnaround in 5 years in minority representation in this police department. And in 2019, when we presented our plan, we were able to be released from that federal consent decree.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you for that. Detroit had a consent decree that we were supposed to be in for 3 years. And I think we ended up in it for 13 years. So that's a whole nother discussion. And I think what I'm hearing is that going back to some of the old school stuff, Commissioner Outlaw talked about being an explorer and a cadet. I was actually a cadet. So sometimes, why are you laughing? But sometimes we have to go back to some of the old ways of doing things, because there were merits, in a lot of those programs. So thank you all for sharing. Well, I'm going to wrap up with our last little, question, because I see we can probably talk on and on. I want to see if we have any questions out there. But I want to we've talked about mass shootings, and the question is not really per se mass shooting, but we've talked about the culture of violence. But one of the things as president that I felt passionately about was the number of children and adolescents getting guns from home and being involved in shootings, the increase in suicides. We just heard about the 6-year-old that got a gun from home in the backpack. We know about that. I don't know if you saw the viral video of a baby that had a loaded handgun, baby in diapers in the hallway. I saw this myself with the gun loaded, had gotten it from home. Luckily, the child didn't shoot, nothing happened. I was like, these are strong babies now, handling this big gun. But just seriously, this has become a chronic problem, in terms of unsecured guns. They're being involved in mass shootings. So I said, what can Noble do? So I partnered with Everytown on It Starts at Home initiative. And it's a simple initiative. It's just talking to the community. And like you said, Chief Paul, having those listening sessions and those events. And we did something in Baltimore, and I'm going to punt to Commissioner Harrison. But simple things like we were giving away, just free, can you see this? I don't know if it's coming, but free gun locks. And we have palm cards. And I want our audience to know that the panelists that we have here are committed to this program and pledged to this program to just educate our community, because now we're beginning to see more of these incidents, and the media is reporting on them more, because these statistics all got lumped into either homicide statistics. But I'm saying pull those out and let's deal with that issue. So I'm going to punt over to Commissioner Harris, only because he was the first person I called, to run this by him, as one of my advisors, to say, what do you think about this? So I'm gonna let him talk about it. We did a program in Baltimore, and I'm hoping that, we'll be coming to Baton Rouge, coming to Philly. So no cost to you. We're providing, Noble's providing the gun locks. We got a sponsor for that, but we just want to bring awareness to this situation. So enough said for me, but Commissioner Harrison, please speak on the merits of that in our conversation.
Thank you for that. I remember when the call came in, it was an easy yes. It was, what can we do to try to minimize children from getting guns, people who are not supposed to have them from getting them, in a way that's preventive, that we can prevent. And she came up with the idea. I said, absolutely, count me in. Let me get on the phone and start making some calls to all of my colleagues. Thank you all for answering the call. And let me say how proud I am that Noble's taking this leadership role in being very proactive and determined to do this. It was an easy yes for us. Thank you for coming to Baltimore. Now we have the gun locks that our neighborhood community officers and coordination officers can meet with community members. And for those who want one, who need a gun lock and who want one, who want to be responsible gun owners, can take it and begin to lock those guns up. Because yes, like many places, we have had incidents where a person got a hold of a gun that should have never got a hold of it, either through the negligence of the gun owner or some other nuance, but nonetheless got a hold of it and either shot and killed another person or shot and killed themselves. And yes, it does tie into our shooting and homicide statistics, but this is totally preventable. It's totally preventable, and I want to thank you, Madam President, thank Noble for being a leader on this initiative, and just thank you for considering calling me and calling these other leaders who all said yes upon receiving the call. And we're proud to be able to say we want to do our part in trying to prevent accidental shootings and deaths in a way that makes people responsible gun owners at the very same time.
Thank you. Commissioner Outlaw.
I regardless of where you stand on gun ownership, our young people really, really, really deserve to be protected by those who are responsible for protecting them. And I say that because, depending on what program you follow, some programs will put the onus on the children. Some programs will put the onus on the adults. The bottom line is that young people need to know what to do when they come across a firearm. And their caregivers or adults also need training and reminders on best ways to store their guns. In Philadelphia, in the beginning, I started out by responding to incidents where a young person was shot for whatever the reason. But it got to be so many of them, I had to delegate some of that to the executive team. And I will tell you this, there are a lot of things that you can't unsee. There are a lot of sounds that you can't unhear. And I can still remember a particular incident where a 9-year-old witnessed her little brother shoot himself in the head because he was playing with it, playing with the gun. And these kids have been traumatized so much already as it was. And I met them at the hospital and I hugged her and she was crying one of those full-on cries, shaking uncontrollably. And I just knew, I didn't care. I just knew that when I let her go, that my shirt would be drenched. And when I let her go, I looked at my shirt and it wasn't. She was in so much shock, she couldn't even squeeze a tear out. And one of the first things she said to me was, I know I'm gonna need physical therapy. A 9-year-old, now obviously she didn't get it right. She said physical therapy. Mm-hmm. But the fact that a 9-year-old knows that she needs therapy or will need therapy based off of what she just witnessed. And then the older brother whose care they were supposed to be in, he's sitting there panicked and in shock and saying, my mom's gonna kill me. There's so many people impacted by this negligence, when there's these little simple things that can be done to prevent this altogether. And we're seeing it more and more because, again, it's glamorized on social media. It's glamorized in what we listen to, what we wear, what we watch, what our kids are exposed to. And I'm not saying that we should be the censorship police by any means, but this is an effort to put guardrails or parameters around the guns that we know are going to exist and make sure that we're not going to continue at the pace that we are and losing an entire generation.
Thank you. Chief Paul.
Well, I agree with everything that they both stated, so I'm not going to restate that. We do have the gun locks, the education and awareness piece, like Commissioner Outlaw stated, was so important. You know, unfortunately, I had to go on one of those scenes. I was at a community event and having this conversation about gun safety, giving out gun locks, and shortly thereafter, we had another event happen. When we talk about gun storage, I'm just going to change up a little bit. First, I support this initiative. We're all in, and we got to keep hearing it until they're tired of hearing it. We can't stop talking about gun safety. We're losing too many babies. But another piece in gun storage is that's really hurting our community here is a car is not a safe place to store a gun.
Thank you.
We have too many guns that are ending up in the hands of criminals. And they got it, watch this, out of unlocked cars. I'm not even talking about the locked cars. We could just talk about the unlocked cars that they're going in neighborhoods and just pulling on the handles, and the cars are not locked. We have to do a better job of securing our weapons to save our babies. Another thing I like to just touch on just a little bit when it comes to this, I really think that when you look at technology today, that was one of the questions we talked about. If America was really serious about guns and gun violence, there's a lot of things we can do from a technology standpoint to keep guns out of the hands of criminals, right? Yeah. A lot of technology, a lot of biometrics, and we can go on and on with tracking devices and on and on. Things that if there really was a desire from industry to make those changes, then I think we can start with legislation. We did it with cars. I can go over so many industry where legislation set the stage on what that standard is. But technology has advanced so much from tracking devices to biometrics that gun manufacturers can step up and do their part. But the reason they don't have to, and I'm going to say this and I'm going to end, because of all the guns that were seized in my city, over 1,800 guns taken off the streets last year. All of those people, a lot of those people, they just go buy another gun.
Yeah. So easy. So very easy. Well, thank you for that. Just checking in, do we have any burning questions from our audience? Just asking the noble team out there, do we have any burning questions from the audience?
Yes, give me 1 second. I am going through some of them. It says, that was a powerful statement regarding those who wash out. How are you each addressing the causes of washout?
I think she's talking about the recruitment and hiring and people who wash out of the
academy.
Yeah, well, number one, we're making sure that there are no disparities that are causing people to wash out, like certain questions asked a certain way that create a disparity between minorities and others. And so we want to make sure that the testing process is a bias-free test that doesn't create disparities and make people or minorities or others get eliminated because of the test. Our physical agility, we want to make sure we're always looking to update that to make sure it's the national best practice so that we're not eliminating more females than necessary. because they can't do as many push-ups as a man, or some other things, because once you become a police officer, I don't know that anybody ever asked you to do a push-up once you become a police officer, but it's about upper body strength. And so it's things like that. Different states have different policies on former marijuana use. It was 3 years in Louisiana. I think that has changed some, Chief Paul. It was 2 or 3 years in Maryland. It is now 1 year. And so things like that, making sure we're not disqualifying people unnecessarily, and then making sure that we have the infrastructure to help them get better so that they're not washing out because they can't run a mile after being there 10 weeks, that we can help them run 1 block in 1 week and 2 blocks in 2 weeks, and so on and so forth, to get them ready to join the academy and then help them improve while they're in the academy. But there are all types of things we look at, and we want to make sure there are no biases in our hiring process.
Anyone else have something to add?
I think it's important, just piggybacking on what Commissioner Harrison said, you have to look at all of the areas of discretion in your, or subjectivity in your hiring process, and then ensure that there are policies in place to root out bias. And traditionally, that would be in the psychological evaluation, it would be in the background investigation, right? And then there's other areas that the state mandates. There's just some things that you can't change. So we also lose people on the reading test. We have a reading test that's required here in the state. And depending on what your educational system is like, that might be a challenge for a lot of your applicants here. That's not something, you got to read, folks, right? So going back to Commissioner Harrison's point, what can we do to supplement, to provide workshops or training on the front end to make sure that you're successful moving forward? Same thing with the physical agility. We partner with with the community college on the academic side, and then on the physical agility stuff, we partner with some local gyms and so on and so forth. But I think we have to be really creative and making sure that we're not only, again, attracting who we want, but then we don't weed them out because their differences or their lifestyles or their upbringing is different. And another thing is we lose people because, I don't know about you guys, I had to force my kids to get driver's licenses. So you have folks nowadays, especially on the East Coast, they might not have a driver's license, and then they get to EVOC and then they wash out of the academy. So it's not just making sure that we can get people on the department and into the academy, but we also have to ensure that they're successfully completing the academy, knowing that they may have a different lived experience. So it's rooting out bias, but also ensuring that there's a supportive infrastructure to support the diversity that we bring into the department.
Thank you.
Another question is, what role can retired officers play?
Well, I think retired officers can play a number of roles. We did this in New Orleans. We're now doing it in Baltimore. I know others around the country do it, but they can, depending on the retirement rules of that city or that state, they are allowed to either come back as a full-time civilian employee or a contractual employee. The civilian employees are allowed to come back and are entitled to the benefits of the city, even though they are in retirement. Contractual employees might not be allowed to come back as a civilian hired by the city, because you can't work for a police department having retired from a police department as a civilian. But some departments like Baltimore allow, we have contractual positions where people come back and we pay them a contractual salary, but they're not paying into the pension system or the health care. And so they don't get those benefits, but they can come back as a contractual employee, but their salary is capped, and because they can't go over it, because if they go over it, they void the eligibility for the pension. Different cities will have different rules based on city and state pension systems.
Anyone else?
Yeah, we used a reserve officer program. That program had been abandoned some years ago. We started that back up, and we're using our retirees to jumpstart our reserve officer program. One last point I would like to point on the recruitment question. One of the things that we've done here, when we do backgrounds on police officers, on applicants, we invest a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources go into that process. So when they don't make it out the academy, there are different rules on why someone may not make it. For example, they may not pass so many tests, or they may fail a specific type. That doesn't mean they still can't serve. So what we've been doing is we hire them in other positions within a department. We sit down, we have a conversation. We have trainees who didn't make it out the academy who are now dispatchers, who work in our communications division, who are analysts. And then we allow them, if they so choose, once they address those issues, to qualify for the next academy. So that was something different that we had never done before, offering them other positions in the department and just encouraging them to continue to serve. But there are more ways to serve than just being a police officer. I just wanted to touch on that piece.
Thank you. Commissioner Outlaw, anything to add?
Madam President, I think you're a good example. I mean, seriously, as retirees, and I don't want to speak for you, I'm not there yet, God willing, but, retirees have the ability to say things that sometimes active folks can't. Meaning that, we have to remain neutral. It's not that we're thoughtless human beings that don't have our own personalities or opinions, but when we're actively working, our own opinions don't necessarily, that's not what matters. It's obviously we have to lead with a moral compass, but we're a little bit more balanced or measured in our responses. And I found that a lot of retirees contribute to the profession on the larger level by really calling out things for what they are, serving as mentors to active officers that, looked up to them when they were active. And sometimes they come back and say, look, you know what, it's not that serious, or whatever it is, or let me help you stay out of trouble, or let me show you what retirement looks like. Don't you want to get here too? I mean, there's so many opportunities, I think, for retirees to still serve and not have to wake up to an alarm clock. Look, that's my goal when I retire, not to have to wake up to an alarm clock every morning. But I really think that, we focus a lot on community, but we have to do more with focusing internally on our employee safety and well-being. And when we talk about morale, it's really helpful when we have peers that we can turn to speak to their lived experience and their professional experience, in a very real way. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but there's a lot of power in the ability to look back and say, here's what I've learned over my career. Here's some pitfalls you can avoid. Here are some things you can do to continue to support and uplift the profession. And these are the things you want to look forward to when you retire and have an entire life outside of law enforcement.
Well, thank you for that. I say I'm retired. Most people say I'm not really retired, because you find that you're just as busy, but in a different way. And mine was with Noble, and giving back. And retirees can be mentors, especially, I want to speak to the females, especially for females, because that's a whole nother discussion. But a lot of the things that I faced are some of the things that are still going on now. So we've made some strides, but there's still things that are going on. So retirees and women, we can all serve as mentors. And so if you know someone, call them. I offer myself to all of you, and any of you, if you want to call retirees, just bounce some things off of us, maybe get a different perspective. So as many roles that retirees can play. I hope any retirees that's on this are Noble members. If not, join Noble. I think there might be something in the chat with our website where you can join and, become involved. We have committees, a lot of different ways that you can actually give back. And Noble has a retiree committee. So if you want to do something as a retiree, Noble has many, many, many roles for you. So thank you for that. So we are kind of wrapping up. Do we have just one more real hot burning question on something that we have not already talked about?
Well, you mentioned a little bit about dealing with millennials and just the gender gaps. But one question is, how do anyone on the panel address the poor interpersonal skills of today police recruits caused by cell phone text messaging technology?
I think we covered that in our social media discussion, but if anyone has any last, points on that, that'll be our last question. But we had an extensive conversation in our social media and technology discussion. But anyway,
I'll say now. I'll try to take a stab at that if I can. I don't specifically address it directly with recruits, but I address it with my executive team and my command staff. Like, I'll say things like, if you are communicating by email, that is probably the worst form of communication. If someone doesn't reply back and answer your question right away, then what you should, the best form is in person, where you can see them face to face. The next best is to pick up the phone and call them. So if you have to send an email, or if you have to send a text message, but we have to ensure that you're getting the reply you want. But we want to make sure all the nuances of what's built into the directive or the vision or the mission or the question asked is fully understood by the person receiving it. And so I spent a lot of time with communication with my senior team, but then I compel them to go take that down to the command level. I spend time with them to push it down through sergeants, lieutenants and sergeants and officers about communication, encoding and decoding. And let's get away from the sending texts and sending emails. Someone in my office sitting next to me, if they would just raise their voice and say, "Hey, Commissioner," I would answer them through the wall, but they want to send me an email or a text message. And so I walk over to their office and look them in the face and answer their question. And you know what? It's usually not what they ask. And so we spend time about communication at the appropriate level, but I force them to take it all the way down to the recruit and officer level to make sure what's being said is understood, and to make sure, because when they get to the community, they very well may have to communicate with people who don't communicate by text and by email or by social media and posting on social media. And they very well may be communicating or have to understand the complaint of somebody with 2 generational separations between them.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to add something before we wrap up? That's our last question.
I'll just say something real quick on it. I can text all day long, but I recognize that that's not everyone's preference, especially on people, for people on my team. So you have to know what people's personal preferences are, but you have to train to it, because we know that there's this generational gap. You can't assume that everybody knows how to do it. Now, I know when I was raised, if someone asked you how you were doing, you were taught that finding you. I used to think that finding you was one word, finding you, right? I did. But, we were taught how to answer the phone at home. We were taught how to, greet our elders. We were taught how to do all of these things. And some of it is cultural. But I'm saying all of that to say we can't assume that everyone was raised in the same way. So given that we know there's a reliance upon technology, there's a reliance on laptops, especially now, as I talked about earlier, we're folding more and integrating more technology into our roles and our jobs as force multipliers. You'll have officers sitting in cars down on their laptops, typing a report and not looking out and about, being safe, and engaging with the community. So you have to train to it and not assume that it's just something that people know how to do.
Yeah. Chief Paul?
No, I agree with what they're saying. Look, the academy, we have this is generational leadership issues. We talk about in our training academy, and it is a challenge, but I think part of it is we have to embrace it. Here's the reality. The old people like Mike and I mean, Danielle, she's going to be around a long time, but the old guys like Mike and I, the officers are getting younger. We're not the future. So we have to embrace the technology. We have to listen to this next generation. I just started a committee right before I left, and it had a lot to do with the social media and how our officers are using social media, of young officers to sit down and have conversations with us concerning the next generation. What are we missing? How can we do better as leaders? Because a lot of our experience, obviously, our decisions are not just based on our life experience, it's based on our law enforcement experience, it's based on what we've learned through the years. And I want to hear from those young officers. So we engage them in the community. So that's one thing that we're doing right now, to ask them, how can we recruit better as well for the next generation? So we're trying to embrace it more, and understand the different generations that are on our jobs right now. I want you to think about that. I think Mike said he got 50-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and 20-year-olds. Think about that. It's challenging. But you know what? We as a profession can do just about anything. I am never, ever fearful that we will not meet the level of our capabilities. The fear is always that we will never, that we will fail to the level of our preparedness.
Thank you. Well, that was our last question. I'm gonna give each panel. I'm so sorry we've gone over a little bit. I know you all have had a very long day, and I appreciate you being here. But this has been very insightful, and I hope engaging, to our audience. So I'm gonna give you an opportunity to wrap up with whatever it is that you want to, to say. Take your time. I'm going to start how I began with Commissioner Outlaw.
Oh, no, great. Oh, you know what, Murph, I'm closer to 50 than you think, brother, but thank you. I'll take that. No, this has been an amazing opportunity just to share. And oftentimes, to your point, Madam President, we are constantly on the defense, explaining why or justifying, or you see us on the news when it's something bad, although we got a whole bunch of good stuff going all the time. What you really see or hear the most are the negatives. So I value and appreciate when we just get to answer questions and people hear the opportunity to hear what we think, what we believe, because it's very rare when people get to see the human side of us. So please know, if nothing else, for those of you aspiring to become, or for those of you in leadership positions now, I know there are several of you on that have led your own departments, your leaders in your own right, and can be on this panel just as easily as we are. We are as successful as our brother and sister to our left and our right. And I truly, truly believe that. So in the spirit of collaboration, in the spirit of brotherhood and sisterhood, I really just appreciate the opportunity to be here. And we will continue to make ourselves available as we see fit, and continue to knock these doors down and leave them open for the people coming behind us.
Thank you. Chief Paul.
No, just again, thank you for the opportunity. And I know we have some law enforcement leaders that are on the phone, some officers who are aspiring to move up through the ranks. Here's what I want you to know. We're proud of you. There are some things that are going to be happening, that are currently happening in this country. And there are some individuals who are going to try to paint you with this broad brush. We are better than that. We are bigger than that. And I just want you to know that we will continue lifting you up. There's so many people in our communities all across America who are praying for our law enforcement officers. And there are far, far, far more people who support you. And you need to know that, and always remember that we are still, regardless of what you may hear in the media sometimes, regardless what may be trending, you are still part of one of the most noble professions in this country.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Harrison, last words.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to Noble. Thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed being with all of you and my esteemed colleagues and friends tonight. And so it was an honor. It was a pleasure. And I will reiterate what Chief Paul just said. To all those who are watching and listening, please go encourage someone to be part of the solution and encourage them to join, in my opinion, the most noble of all professions, because while a lot of professions are noble, most professions don't run toward danger, and most professions don't have people sacrificing their own safety and lives for the benefit of people we don't know. And so that's what this calling is all about. And it is a calling. And for those who might feel that pull or that call, I invite you to answer that call and join us and be the solution that you want to see. Noble is always helping to lead the way. So once again, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. certainly if there's anything I can do for any of you, please give me a call. This has been very engaging. I do apologize that we did go over, but I appreciate your patience and stamina in being here, and appreciate everything that you're doing in your community and what you do also for Noble. I do want to mention about our CEO Symposium. Hopefully that was in the chat. That is April 14th and 15th in Detroit, Michigan. We'll have information on our website, www.natl.org for further information. So thank you all for being here. Everyone have a wonderful rest of evening and be safe. Thank you all. Good night.